Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements! And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello!
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. What an exciting time to be a basketball fan. We're already in mid-July 2025, and a lot to report on. I am going to be getting content out in the days and weeks to come. Plenty to cover in the WNBA. We've had some trades. Obviously, we're getting close to the league-wide cut-down date, which is going to be a great opportunity, I think, to review transactions across all 13 WNBA rosters. And in the NBA, of course, we have just seen most of free agency play out, still some loose odds and ends across all 30 NBA teams, but we saw the draft. We've seen some big trades. We've seen some free agent signings. I'm actually going to be heading to Las Vegas for NBA Summer League later this week and excited to have more conversations with folks on the ground there. But it's been fun to text and kind of wind up into different conversations over the last few weeks with folks. And, today I wanted to get something out, just kind of going through how I would tier out the best performances, smartest, most creative performances across each conference. I want this episode to be on the Eastern Conference. And to get right into it, I think we got to give a lot of love to the Atlanta Hawks. They're a tier 1 team for me in terms of performance this offseason. The trade they were able to make with the New Orleans Pelicans a year ago, where they got Dyson Daniels, and they also created a large traded player exception by sending DeJounte Murray to New Orleans. Obviously, that did not work out well for the Pelicans with DeJounte Murray, being out with a lower body injury. Really, wishing him well as he recovers from the torn Achilles. But for Atlanta, that was a home run deal. Obviously, Dyson Daniels has a breakout season as one of the great thieves in recent NBA history. One of the best steal seasons we've seen really since like peak Chris Paul in the mid 2000s. And with his size, his ability to guard, really credibly positions 1 through 3, maybe even slide up to the 4. And on a Trae Young team, it was just so brilliant for them to get this big defender who also just had a career season shooting the 3-point shot, and to pair him with Trae Young and this team of, bigger wings, forwards that are athletic, that can rim run and shoot, Risa Shea, Jalen Johnson. I mean, last year was a great year for Atlanta. What they have now done, building upon that foundation for the second offseason in a row, is nothing short of incredible. They were able to fleece the New Orleans Pelicans a second time. I think maybe the best acquisition, the best sort of trade made this offseason was on draft day between the Hawks and the Pelicans to get an unprotected draft asset for 2026 from the Pelicans. Either the Milwaukee pick or New Orleans could be as high as the number 1 overall pick. In all likelihood, it won't be the number 1 overall pick. But I would say that there is a strong probability that the Atlanta Hawks have been gifted a top 10 pick. And the fact that New Orleans didn't throw that protection on the trade is a really bad look for them. We'll talk more about that in the Western Conference episode, of course. But with Atlanta making that trade on draft night, going from the 13th pick down to 23, still getting Asa Newell, still getting a large forward-sized player that I think fits really well into their long-term plans. They probably could have taken Asa Newell at 13. By the way, he's a Georgia boy. So, keeping him in the state is going to make the fans happy. But I think he would have been fine to take at 13. The fact that they were able to get him at 23, you get this asset for the future. And then they use the traded player exception that they created a year prior in a very creative sign and trade to get one of the best players available on the market, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. If you are not looking carefully enough, you might think that contract that Naw signed is a mid-level, a non-taxpayer mid-level contract. It's actually a agreed upon deal, but it's signed and traded into that traded player exception that Atlanta had. So really nice cap management there. That means that as a team that's well under the first apron and not in the tax, they actually to this day have the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. So about a $15 million salary slot. Under this new CBA, teams now can take that slot into the regular season. You can use it in a trade. And so when you consider that Atlanta has, boosted their draft capital and their coffers in recent years, I wouldn't be surprised if they go into the regular season, see where they're at, see what they need, and then they make a win now move where they're able to take a player into that slot entirely. Trae Young, the franchise player for Atlanta, I really like how Bill Simmons put it a week or two ago. There's a superstar audition happening this season for Trae Young. He was able to go out and recruit Naw. Hey, sign with us. I want you on my team. I want you to guard opposing point guards so I don't have to. Please come here. And they were able to get veteran Luke Kennard, one of the best shooters in the world, on a, I think acceptable $11 million salary for 1 year. This Atlanta backcourt is dynamite. I really, really like the Risa Shea, Jalen Johnson forward combination. We haven't even mentioned that in a Boston Celtics salary dump, they're able to get Kristaps Porzingis. So, their center rotation is going to be Onyeka Okongwu, Kristaps Porzingis. I think those guys could even play together. I think being able to rotate those guys plus the forwards you have, and now this really, I would say a really stacked backcourt with a lot of different looks. Atlanta is a team that absolutely can win multiple playoff rounds and could go back to the conference finals for the first time since 2021. So got to give them a lot of credit. I do want to note that it's possible that the Hawks could structure the Luke Kennard edition as a sign and trade, and that actually could go into the remainder of that traded player exception. Right, it was a $25.3 million TPE. So if what they could do is basically use that TPE from a year ago to fully add Naw and Kennard, then they would actually, that's how they would have access to that full non-taxpayer MLE. Now, if they don't structure it that way, and I guess time will tell, they would have about $3 million in the non-taxpayer MLE if they did in fact use that to sign Kennard. So that is something I want to see worked out. But otherwise, I just a lot of optionality and a lot of looks for this team. Really, really applaud them. Also in Tier 1 in the Eastern Conference, I'm going to go with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, they had a more, I would say conservative run of things, but relative to their options, they're a team well into the second apron. And the decision is, are we going to shed salary, lighten the tax bill for ownership, and possibly get worse, possibly take a step back? That would have been a terrible decision, not just because you don't want to be cheap and not just because, you spend the money to win games, but the Eastern Conference is wide open. We have seen Lillard, Tatum, and Halliburton all go down with Achilles injuries. Atlanta did get a lot better, but they're far from a sure thing. Orlando, we're going to talk about that momentarily. They're better. Detroit, a year better, with internal growth. I mean, there are teams that are going to win games in the East, New York Knicks, but the Cavs won the regular season last year. Even though the postseason didn't go their way, I think you can look at it as simply as if Darius Garland doesn't have a toe injury, they have as good a chance as anybody of getting all the way to the finals. So if they have better injury luck, I think running back the quartet of Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland for at least one more year makes sense. They have DeAndre Hunter now for a full season. Yes, he's on a pretty beefy salary slot. I think there were some concepts floating around on how they could, trade Hunter out, get a cheaper player in. But look, they have been trying so hard to get a small forward on this team at 6'7", 6'8", who can play on both ends of the floor. Like, DeAndre Hunter is the best look that they've had at the three during this mini era in Cleveland. They really could use his size and ability at that spot. So when you do all the final accounting, the Cavs re-signed Sam Merrill. He is a good shooter, good backcourt player, and good rotation piece. They're able to get him on an acceptable deal. And then, interestingly, they let Ty Jerome walk for something that was less than I thought. I mean, he only took, it was about $9 million in the year one salary from Memphis Grizzlies. But for comparison's sake, I'm seeing Sam Merrill's projected year one salary as 8.5. So in a lot of ways, they picked Merrill, the 29-year-old shooting guard, over Ty Jerome. Jerome, yes, there were pretty big defensive question marks, especially in the playoffs last year. I do think Ty Jerome is a better player in a vacuum, but they keep Merrill. He's going to be on a team-friendly deal for the next 4 years. The final year four salary is projected to be about $10.5 million. I mean, that is a fraction of the salary cap as it rises. So, I think that was a good priority piece there. Like I said, they still have DeAndre Hunter on the roster. They still have Max Strus for about $16 million. They made a trade where they sent out Isaac Okoro, a former lottery pick of the team. They turned him into Lonzo Ball on a team-friendly deal, $10 million this year, team option for year 2. So if it doesn't work out or if Lonzo's injuries spike back up, they're going to be able to cut bait with that salary. Otherwise, I think Lonzo is a much better fit. I could really see him, you hug Garland and Mitchell with Lonzo in the right second unit mixed lineups, and Lonzo's someone that can guard point guards, his spot up shots. He's such a high IQ player. I really, really like the play there, and I just hope it works out. I hope he's able to stay healthy. By and large, Isaac Okoro is going to enter a brand new phase of his career, right? Former lottery pick, Cleveland, I think, had every incentive to try him out, to get him to stick. I was actually pretty high on Okoro coming out of Auburn, but ultimately, when the jumper doesn't come around and you're only, 6'5", not 6'8", being a defensive first wing when you don't have great size, there's just not so much you can do with that player. And, Chicago, we'll get to them. I don't know exactly what their thought is on turning Lonzo into Okoro. Although, admittedly, it could be just a talent play. It might just be time for them to cut bait on Lonzo, and maybe they do view Okoro as somewhat of an untapped asset. Nonetheless, I really like Cleveland's rotation as we head into the season. I think they're top 7, 8, 9 guys. Dean Wade, for example. This is a team that can win the Eastern Conference, especially with things down the way that they are. I see Larry Nance is back. Yeah, I think, I'm going to keep them in tier 1 because to me, they did what they had to do to be one of the favorites to win the East. And they didn't cheap out and trade away players to lighten their tax bill. They are going to be paying a lot of money, not just as a second apron team, but as a repeater tax team. So, Dan Gilbert, you can say a lot of things about him, but at least he pays for a winning team. And next I want to, I kind of started bringing them up, Orlando Magic, to trade 4 first-round picks plus a pick swap for Desmond Bane. That's a bold move, but it is like definition of win now. Bold win now move. They're also able to add Tyus Jones on a $7 million salary. Shout out to Tyus Jones. He doubles his salary from a year ago. He had to settle for the minimum to go to Phoenix. That did not work out. And so for him to get double his salary, to get back into the, I'm above the minimum kind of guy, that's big time. Because if you get stuck on that minimum salary as a player, sometimes you can never get off it. Tyus Jones is still really early in his career. And I think that he comes in and gives Orlando a guard with real experience, real playmaking chops. Desmond Bane, by the way, sneakily developed his playmaking quite a bit in Memphis, and I think he could come in and be one of the best playmakers Orlando has had in recent memory. That's always been a drawback for them, is that they put together a defensive roster with size, but they don't have enough shooting and playmaking. And, until Franz and Paolo really come around as shooters, and you want the ball in their hands. So, I think having guys who can spot up around them is important. I think Desmond Bane is going to be able to do that and more. I think the best version of this team is going to be Paolo and Franz, not just dominating the basketball, but to be able to play freely, to be able to come in and out of the paint, set up, Paolo at the nail, have Franz set a back screen for somebody running baseline and then pop out to the 3-point line. Does Paolo pass? Does he drive? Like, to create some misdirection, to create some suspense on what's going to happen. I think ultimately anything to get this team out of, kind of the, kind of junky offense that we saw the last few years. I mean, really undermined a top 5 defense this past year to be a bottom 5 offense. So, I think this is a logical gamble. Yes, it was an expensive trade, but Desmond Bane really was probably the best player available, certainly for Orlando to get. I don't know how many other players in this marketplace would have been worth trading out that much draft capital. Notably, Kevin Durant going to Houston didn't warrant that much draft capital, and Houston had that in spades plus young talent. So, I think Desmond Bane, as someone who is still in the prime of their career, one of the best shooters and passers on the market, full stop. I think that was a great deal for Orlando. They bring back Mo Wagner, no surprise, who did the team a solid. He opted out, or Orlando declined a team option so that they could, give him a brand new deal. They had bird rights on him, so there was a little homegrown cooking there to make sure that they were able to fill out the bottom of their roster. But yeah, I mean, I look at this Orlando team. I think that they have every chance to make a big splash, win multiple playoff rounds for the first time since the Dwight Howard era, and you got to reward them for that. Now, I do think that there are questions like spending $15 million on Jonathan Isaac, and then he's non-guaranteed for the following year. Could you trade Isaac at 15, Goga Batatse is 8.3. Now you're at $23 million in salary. They don't have that much, draft capital to move, but could you find a deal? Maybe it's Jonathan Isaac and Anthony Black, a team that looks at Anthony Black as a guard that's about a first-round talent evaluation. I think that there are moves on the margins this team could make. They do have some room under the first apron, about $7.5 million. So I think they're going to be able to participate in the trade market in season and make sure that they have a team that can really go for it come playoff times. And then a very different circumstance, but I'm going to have the Washington Wizards up here in tier 1 because you look at where they've been. This team has so much more direction, so much more clear cut where they're going and how they're doing it. I really liked them trading out Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey and the number 40 pick for CJ McCollum is expiring, and Kelly Olynyk. I know that helped New Orleans. If you're Washington, that last year for Olynyk, dead money, it's fine. I mean, they're not looking to make the playoffs this year. And then I think alternatively, they have really clarified they're going to have a ton of cap space in 2026 with a lot of players expiring. Chris Middleton, CJ McCollum, Marcus Smart. They obviously drafted Trey Johnson at number 6, who I think that's a pretty good outcome for them as a number 6 overall pick, someone with a lot of offensive talent, a lot of firepower as a shooter. Get him out there on the floor with Bub Carrington, Bilal Coulibaly, Alex Sarr. They got AJ Johnson last year from the Milwaukee Bucks. I think that this team is going to be bad, but they're doing it the right way. I think another year of tanking makes sense. They have that financial flexibility. And then the kicker was they were able to steal Cam Whitmore in this dump of a move from the Rockets. Basically, the Rockets doing Whitmore a favor, saying, hey, we'll find you a location where you can play. We just don't have the minutes for you anymore. And so only a couple second-round picks to bring in Cam Whitmore. I think Cam Whitmore could start for them and in general could be a future starting wing for them. So I really like the Wizards' direction here. They know who they are. They know what they know what the assignment is. They didn't rush to use their full non-taxpayer mid-level, so they have that in season if they want to use that as a trade asset. And I think in general, they're going to be able to flip a lot of veterans if they're playing well. So they're going to play their vets. They're going to see if they can flip them for, 3 seconds or highly protected first, in the best case scenario. But I think the Wizards deserve to be applauded for, clear-headed approach to rebuilding this team. And time is on their side in that way. Moving down to tier 2, I kind of call this group the well-timed or necessary risk takers. I think that, to kind of fly through Boston, just because we can get in the weeds quick with the numbers, they trade out Drew Holiday and Porzingis, and it shaves off about $260 million from their future tax bill. If Jason Tatum is going to miss this entire season, which I would guess that is the case, Boston's not winning the title this year. Doesn't make any sense for them to spend $500 million in salary plus luxury tax bills. Getting out of the second apron. They haven't officially done that yet. They're still, by my calculations, a few $100,000 into the second apron, but that's something that you can get out of during the year. In general, I think that there's more flexibility in their front court. Porzingis only had the 1 year left, and Horford obviously just expired. They decided to let Luke Kornet walk, and he takes a 4-year deal with the Spurs. Now they have, Sam Hauser on a team-friendly deal. I don't think that they should move Sam Hauser. I think there were some versions of this offseason where they did, but I think once Tatum went down with an injury, it made way more sense to trade the big salaries. Trade Drew Holiday, who's well over, he's like $32 million next year. Trade Porzingis at $30 million. Why are you trading Sam Hauser? It's only $10 million. Now, with the luxury tax, that Sam Hauser at $10 million was like $70 million in actual cost for ownership. But now, just find a different way creatively to get out of the second apron. You're still going to pay a luxury tax, but I think Hauser is way more valuable to this team in 26-27 on a sub-MLE salary. So keep him. They have George Niang for a year coming over from the Hawks. They just added Luke Garza, who, I think Garza, could give them good minutes. I think in general could be a pretty adequate Luke Kornet replacement. So, I think for this year, they have some guys that are going to get on the floor. Maybe they could grow their trade value. Maybe there's an opportunity to move guys at value. I think I'm going to be looking at how many minutes does Peyton Pritchard get, and that contract he's on is so team friendly. Like, the future of this Celtics team could really be built around the fact that their starting point guard is only on a $7 or $8 million salary slot if he really hits. Now, alternatively, Derek White, who is still on the team, he makes 3 times as much money as Peyton Pritchard. Do they want to have both of those guys on the next great Celtics team? Is that their starting backcourt, point guard, shooting guard, with Jaylen Brown and Tatum at the forward spots, and then you're just sort of figuring out the center rotation? Is that what the next great Celtics team looks like? They have time to figure that out. But I think for now, just lowering that tax bill, giving themselves more optionality, it's what they had to do. In some ways it wasn't sexy. Now, I do think that the only name left really to point out, Anthony Simons, 1 year left at $27.67 million coming over from Portland in that Drew Holiday trade. Now, Bill Simmons pointed out that there has not been a ceremony yet announcing the acquisition, and Windhorse meme was attached to that tweet. I do think that there is a read on this that basically, Simons was an asset play, and that they're going to look to flip him to a team more interested in giving him a long-term contract, right? Like, it doesn't really make sense for Boston to keep Simons on the roster for a year and then let him walk in free agency if he's not a part of their long-term plan. They did get bird rights on him, so they'll be able to sign him as a free agent to any deal he wants. But he doesn't really seem like a Boston guy, right? Like, Doesn't, there's a big difference between the Derek White, Peyton Pritchard type of, guard rotation and then like turning the keys over to Anthony Simons. So, we'll see exactly what happens there. My guess is that they'll trade him out for multiple players or, a salary less than $27 million. And, they'll try to get some draft capital as a result, especially in this year that Boston might be down and out. Other teams in tier 2 for me, again, this is, there was risk taking involved in this tier for me. And no one has taken a greater risk than the Milwaukee Bucks this offseason. The Damian Lillard stretch over the next 5 years, the largest stretch in NBA history, about $23 million a year in dead money off the cap. So, wow, that's a big choice. Basically, that means that for, a salary way above the non-taxpayer mid-level is just dead money every year for the next 5 years. Now, with that said, I actually applaud Milwaukee for making a bold decision. They have Giannis Antetokounmpo. They don't know how many more years they will have him. In general, he's the best player in franchise history. He's the biggest superstar that they've had since Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And because he is a homegrown player that appears, at least as of today, there is still a chance that he would end his career in Milwaukee. Like, if they don't win another title with him, it still would be worth it from a business standpoint to make sure that Giannis stays as long as possible and that the era ends as graceful as possible. So with that said, yeah, that dead money might be really, really ornery, but Miles Turner is an upgrade at center. He's younger than Brook Lopez, of course. Kind of does all the best things that Brook Lopez does and more. You steal him away from your rival. I mean, that's my favorite part of this, honestly, is that the Bucks and the Pacers hate each other. And the Bucks are like, yeah, you know what? We will go into salary cap hell for the next 5 years if we can steal the starting center away from the Indiana Pacers, put him next to Giannis and say, hey, 4 years, $107 million deal. This is a value deal. One of the best centers in the NBA on a value deal. If the day comes where we're trading Giannis, we're going to trade Miles Turner. If we never trade Giannis and Miles Turner are playing next to each other for the next 4 years, can we build a contending team over that 4-year period? That's how I look at this deal. Is it desperate? Sure. But if you're Milwaukee, what else are you doing? I think that's where I disagree with some other comments or analysis is, what else are you doing? If the goal is we want to put together a team, and specifically, a crunch time lineup, like it's a big playoff game. It's game 7 of the Eastern Conference playoffs, round 1 or round 2, and we need to win this game so we can advance. Who's on the floor? Giannis. Now you have Miles Turner at center, right? Their guard rotation is very weak. I mean, they were able to re-sign Ryan Rollins on a 3-year deal, very modest amount of salary. They obviously they have the dead money of Lillard's contract. They do not have Damian Lillard playing anymore for them. I think Kevin Porter Jr., he's not my favorite player, but, I think for this team where they're at, I think continuing to invest in him and his athleticism at guard makes some sense to me. They have AJ Green and Andre Jackson Jr., 2 young guards that are going to get more burn this time around. Gary Trent Jr. is back on a very team-friendly deal. Looks like the minimum or a version of the minimum. So it's this is not going to be a great team. They still have Kuzma. Bobby Portis is back on a raise, a slight salary raise. That was kind of surprising to me. I think they're going to be a pretty mediocre team this year, at least to start. But if Giannis is super, super great and Miles Turner is healthy and great, and they can make a trade or two on the margins and go into the playoff field in the East saying, hey, we might only be the 6th seed or we might only be the 7th seed, but we have Giannis. Sell some playoff tickets. sell some, like, get the home fans excited about something. Like, I think we, as a basketball community, over-intellectualize some of these things. Trading Giannis means that your franchise is going to be on fire for at least a few years. Like, there's no replacing Giannis. There isn't a good trade for Milwaukee to move Giannis. There's no replacing him. So I got to give them some credit. That's why I have them in this tier 2 range. The New York Knicks, similar to the Cavs, they were conservative. They're a team that is spending a lot of money. Now, notably, they are not in the second apron. They have about $3.5 million in room from the second apron, and they're hard capped at the second apron. So they really just can't move, do any other major moves. They were able to add Gershon Yabusele. Year one salary is going to be about $5.7 million. I mean, that's a taxpayer mid-level deal. And then he has a player option in year 2. I think Yabusele could give them really good minutes. And if indeed they're hiring Mike Brown as a coach, I think there's going to be a little bit more pace and space in the game plan for this team. I think Yabusele as a shooting big, that's actually really encouraging to me. The idea that they could have Karl-Anthony Towns and Yabusele basically being a stretch big on the floor all 48 minutes of the game. You're rotating Mitch Robinson and Precious Achiuwa into the mix. Precious Achiuwa has not been retained yet. I think that he will be because they need to fill out a roster, and I don't think there's a ton of interest for Precious Achiuwa out there. So they'll probably find a way to give him like a 1+1 at the minimum or something like that. But yeah, I mean, this Knicks team has as good a chance as anybody to go to the finals coming out of the East if they're healthy, if they're playing well. So, they were conservative. They pretty much bringing the band back together. And then I think, the coaching change is going to be really the big shift for them. But I give them credit. I mean, again, they make so much money that it really just would not have been excusable, to sell off pieces. Like, they have to go for it this year. So, we'll give them that credit. Now, this next tier, I'm going to kind of keep it more at a bird's eye level. And these are like teams, I think that there are just major directional questions. So for example, the Brooklyn Nets, a lot of cap space going into the offseason, and they continue to have a lot of cap space. In terms of moves, I mean, they traded for Michael Porter Jr. They accepted Terrence Mann in a salary dump. And then they retained Day'Ron Sharpe and Zaire Williams. I mean, they still have about $22.3 million in cap space. They, I think really the long and short of it is they built their offseason around this Michael Porter Jr. trade. They get the 2032 unprotected first-round pick from the Denver Nuggets. And the question is, was that enough? They sent Cam Johnson to the Nuggets. They take on Michael Porter Jr. 2 more years, about $39-40 million on average each of those years. Michael Porter Jr. is a talented player. It's not dead money, but he's a bit overpaid at that at that price, especially relative to Cam Johnson. So you got 1 first-round pick for turning a good player on a good deal into a worse player on a worse deal. I think that 2032 pick is very, very valuable. We don't know what the Denver Nuggets are going to look like a few years from now, let alone 2032. Jokic would be about 37 years old, 36, 37 years old. That could be a great pick. In the meantime, I mean, this Brooklyn team, they drafted 5 rookies, none of which appear to be players that will be able to contribute super strongly on day one. And, they still have a ton of cap space. I suspect they will be a dumping ground for, other bad salary deals. They're going to be bad. They're going to tank. They're going to try to, get as high a pick in 2026 as they can. Of course, they have worked hard to get their own picks back after some foolish trades. Prior. So I'm a little, I'm a little unclear. Is this just going to be we're the worst team in the league next year? And ultimately, was taking on the bad salary of Michael Porter Jr., did they handle that trade correctly? But, hey, shout out to the Nets. This is the first time they were able to draft a player in the lottery since 2012. So they are making progress in the form of actually taking players in the lottery. So good for them. The Charlotte Hornets are in this range for me. They retained Trey Mann on a acceptable deal, 3 years, $24 million, especially him coming off injury. I think to be able to secure $24 million for himself, that's a big outcome. Dinwiddie and now Colin Sexton, who the Jazz actually had to attach a pick to send him to the Hornets. That was a surprising deal this offseason in exchange for Jusuf Nurkic. We'll talk more about that in the Jazz section. Look, this team is built around LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller. They've added a lot of other guards. So we'll see. We'll see exactly what the synergy on this roster is. I think their front court is more or less a disaster. They did do a trade for Pat Connaughton where they were able to get some additional second-round picks. They didn't use their non-taxpayer mid-level, so they'll still have that to use in a trade during the season. I think it was just like a fine offseason for them. I don't feel dramatically different about their team. I certainly wouldn't guarantee that they make a playoff push based on what they did this offseason. And quite frankly, I think with the East being wide open, it would have been nice. It would have been nice to see them make a bigger set of decisions where it's like, we're going to give LaMelo and Brandon Miller a running mate that can really do something. Like, could they have been the Desmond Bane team? Could they have traded 4 or 5 first-round picks for Desmond Bane? I don't know. Instead, Orlando was able to do that. And smarter move for Orlando, but it just sort of talking out loud, like, I wish that we knew more about what this team is becoming. And instead, I think we're going to have another year where we're just kind of asking ourselves, like, is LaMelo Ball a top 5 point guard in the East? Is he? Yeah. What is this team? Are they poised to have a season like Detroit just had, where Cade Cunningham really took a step up as a lead playmaker, and the team is really built in his image? Is that where we are at with LaMelo Ball or Brandon Miller? I don't know. I just don't really know. I have Indiana Pacers in this range. Really not a fan of them letting Miles Turner walk simply to avoid the tax. The Pacers haven't paid the luxury tax since 2005. And I think that they would. I mean, do they deserve the benefit of the doubt or not? I guess that is sort of a question, right? If Halliburton had not gotten injured in Game 7, and if they win the title, or even if they lose the title, if Indiana was going into this upcoming season as a title favorite, then benefit of the doubt, right? Like, they probably would have gone into the tax. They probably would have found a way to retain Miles Turner on a 4-year deal worth $110 million, right? They would have found a way to beat the Milwaukee Bucks offer. Instead, they decide to trade for Jay Huff, stretch 5, in limited minutes, really, really good shot blocker, as well as a spot-up shooter at the 5 spot. Really team-friendly deal that runs through 2028. Super cheap, a lot of team optionality in year 2 and 3 of the deal. So they basically cheaped out. They basically cheaped out. They said, we're not going to pay the tax if Halliburton's out for the year. We're going to turn Miles Turner into a much, much, much more affordable center. If you squint, you can see how Jay Huff replaces a lot of Miles Turner's skill set. In general, maybe the team is like, we don't want to spend $100 million on a center. We want to spend all of our money on guards and wings and have a very fast-paced offensive team. And we think Obi Toppin can absorb some minutes at the 5, and we think Jarris Walker needs to get on the floor. And, like, you can talk yourself into it. I think by far the smartest thing the Pacers did was a few days before Tyrese Halliburton's injury, they traded for their own pick back. They went to the New Orleans Pelicans. They got their own pick back. Right? They lost, I think it was the 24th pick, right? So or the 23rd pick. They lost the 23rd pick in the draft this year But the reward was now they have their own pick next year, so they could lose 82 games and be okay for a year, right? The panic of Halliburton's Achilles injury from a transaction standpoint, from a cap management standpoint, I mean, that decision, that shrewd move absorbed a lot of the blow from a transaction standpoint. So you got to give them credit for that. They had a spidey sense about them doing that. Again, I can understand intellectually turning Miles Turner into Jay Huff, and they have so much talent already on this team, taken care of on, multi-year deals that are team friendly in structure. But I'm just disappointed. I got to be honest. I'm just disappointed. I think finding a way to retain Miles Turner, even if you decided to trade him 6 months later, I think that's what they should have done. The Miami Heat were, really lower in my estimations before making a trade just yesterday, where they acquired Norman Powell. And so you look at what they've been doing in their backcourt. They have Tyler Hero. Maybe they're going to give him an extension. Maybe they're not. They're not going to have Terry Rozier on the team, presumably, and Duncan Robinson is gone. They got Davion Mitchell last year. They gave him an extension. They have, here goes nothing. Jaka Kunis. They have Jaka Kunis from the lottery, and Norman Powell now. And I actually kind of like this Miami backcourt. Certainly better than I did. I think Hero, Powell, Mitchell, Jaka Kunis is a pretty decent rotation of players. Of course, you have Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware in your front court. I think Miami has some looks. I think they have some looks, and with the best coach in the league, arguably, in Eric Spoelstra, I think that they could build a 44, 45, 46 win team. Could definitely make the playoffs in the East. I just don't really know. Where they're going now. Right, they got Simone Fontecchio. Right, that was the sign and trade with Duncan Robinson. It's interesting the difference in salary. So Duncan Robinson was supposed to be on a $19 million salary before he exercised the early termination option. So the way that the sign and trade worked, Duncan Robinson, that number he was supposed to be on before he opted for free agency goes against the $8.3 million Simone Fontecchio is owed next year. That flexibility is basically realized by the Miami Heat, right? So instead of Robinson taking a $19 million salary for next year, he opts out, terminates the option. This sign and trade brings him to the Pistons. He's, gets $48 million richer, although year 3 of that deal is not guaranteed. Miami gets that space, that flexibility, and Simone Fontecchio is a decent player, $8.3 million. Miami, they have the taxpayer mid-level. They haven't used it yet. So maybe we could see them sign a buyout player, in season, or make some moves on the margins that way. But I don't know. I just have big questions on where this team is going, right? Like Hero, $31 million this year, $33 million the following year. Is he going to get extended? He's eligible. Bam Adebayo, his salary is $37 million this year, jumps up to $49.6 the following year. Miami doesn't figure to be that big of a player in the offseason mix next year. It's not like they're going to be able to open up max cap space. But yeah, I mean, they're hard capped to the second apron. They have plenty of room under the first, or plenty of room to make things happen. I just don't think that they're going to be able to generate more than like 46, 47 wins with this group. And that's if like they really hit. So we'll see. We'll see exactly what they got going on. And then finally, I have Philly kind of in this mix. I think that VJ Edgecombe has already shown a lot in the Utah Summer League. I'm excited to see him a little bit more in Vegas this week. But in general, I think Edgecombe was a great pick at number 3. They also got Broom out of Auburn with their second-round pick. I think that's a great outcome for Philly, very physical forward. So, they have some pieces. I'm excited to see, kind of like what the Maxey, McCain, Edgecombe backcourt looks like. Sort of regardless of the Paul George and Joel Embiid of it all, I think this Philly team does have some signs of life. We don't know yet if Quentin Grimes is going to be back, is going to be retained, his RFA, and really all the RFA negotiations have been wonky and have been greatly delayed so far. So we don't know how that's going to resolve. But yeah, I mean, this basically Philly brought the band back together. Kelly Oubre's back, Andre Drummond's back. They added Trenton Watford for the minimum, which I like that move. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that's probably, if Joel Embiid is limited in terms of his ability to play, they're more like a play-in round team to me. If Joel Embiid and Paul George are playing well, there is some upside here. But I have big questions. Nonetheless, even though it appears that they nailed the Edgecombe pick. And we'll see, obviously, him play more as a rookie. Finally, kind of rounding things out here, Chicago Bulls. Boy, the Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey trade did not age well. Boy. We don't know if Josh Giddey is going to re-sign with the Bulls or not in RFA. By all accounts, that's been a real struggle between those two sides. And it's interesting because Patrick Williams was able to get a $90 million contract without negotiating all that hard with the Bulls. And now it appears that the Bulls are actually, squeezing Giddey a little bit. His cap hold would suggest something like $25 million as the starting salary. Maybe Chicago is like, hell no. How about we start you at 19? So we'll see. Not getting any draft picks for Alex Caruso, him immediately going to OKC and helping push them to a title. Meanwhile, Josh Giddey, you kind of need to re-sign him. Like, if you only got 1 year of Josh Giddey and then he walked, that would be pretty embarrassing. I just don't really love anything that's going on here in Chicago, to be honest. I mean, they traded, like I said, Lonzo for Isaac Okoro. Maybe Okoro as a, kind of second draft opportunity. Maybe he could really excite them. They also re-signed Trey Jones. They used bird rights to bring him back on a 3-year deal. I mean, some of these guys, in a vacuum, I think are fine. But when you add it all up, they just don't have enough shooting and playmaking. I mean, I like Kobe White. He's in the last year of a very team-friendly deal. So team-friendly that they're really not capable of extending him. I mean, 140% off of his $12.9 million salary, that probably just can't get it done. I think Kobe White could probably get closer to $22, $23, $24 million a year in salary on the open market based on what we've seen from him. He's only age 25 as well. Ayo Dosunmu, similar story, just at a smaller scale. Like he's on the last year of his deal, $7.5 million. What is his next contract going to look like? Is Trey Jones essentially replacing him? And maybe Ayo Dosunmu is someone that they would look to move in season. Could they move Kobe White in season? Vucevic is on the last year of his deal, $21.5 million. Is he going to finally get moved? The Bulls reportedly have been holding out for first round pick compensation, which they have not been able to get. And, it's one of those things where, you want what you want, but if you can't have it, like Vucevic really doesn't make sense on this team. They have Patrick Williams long-term. They have some guys like Herder expiring, Zach Collins expiring. They had made a financial move earlier, during the season with the Kings, of course, and they took on some bad salaries. So, we'll see. The Bulls have lots of cap space in 2026. Maybe 2026 is finally the summer that they start acting like the third biggest city in America. But until then, we're not really sure. The Detroit Pistons, not really a fan of what they ended up doing. Essentially they used cap space to bring in Duncan Robinson in that sign and trade. for Fontecchio. They also added Karis LeVert next 2 years for about $15 million annually. And, they had to make these moves quickly in the context of finding out that Malik Beasley is probably not going to play in the NBA again. Very, 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 scary allegations of gambling-related abuses and lots and lots of debt that I think have pushed him to make some bad life choices. So, obviously, wishing Malik Beasley the best as he sort of regains and tries to regain his life after what appears to be kind of a scary set of circumstances. But he will not be in the NBA next year by all accounts, and certainly won't be doing so on a handsomely paid contract. He lost a lot of money these last few weeks. So, I think Detroit is going to be okay next year regardless. I think Duncan Robinson and Karis LeVert are okay. But for me, I think the bigger thing is, why weren't they as aggressive as the Orlando Magic, right? I brought it up with Charlotte. But, you can't really kick Charlotte for not doing something like that. They're not that close to competing. But Detroit almost beat the Knicks in the playoffs. Like, could Detroit have been the team to go out and trade for Desmond Bane? What would that have cost? Would that have cost Ron Holland? Is there a version of things where the Pistons are able to keep Asar Thompson and Jalen Duren, trade what it takes to go out and get Desmond Bane? You get a starting lineup together of Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Desmond Bane, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren. I mean, they have guys. They still have Tobias Harris on the team. So, I think I'm just disappointed that the Pistons didn't do more. But they nonetheless, should be competitive next year. And then the other team in the East that I haven't talked about yet, the Toronto Raptors. And we just saw Masai Ujiri move on. No longer going to be the president of basketball operations there. I do think that Toronto made a great draft day selection. Colin Murray-Boyles, I think he's a very intriguing, power forward size player, athletic, very skilled, very, intense athlete, very smart athlete. So, I think that was a good move. But the fact that they're paying well over $100 million a year for this core, I mean, that Emmanuel Quickley contract, $32 million a year, that has not aged well. And he has not established himself really as a starter there. The RJ Barrett, kind of second draft opportunity, bringing him over from New York. There's been mixed results so far. I actually think that he's shown a lot of promise, as definitely a rotation player long term. I just don't know if he is the guy that you would want to be your starting wing, making a whole host of money. Speaking of wings making a whole host of money, Brandon Ingram, giving him that $40 million contract before he even plays for the team, that was an interesting choice. Right next year alone, they have Barnes, Ingram, Quickley, all making between $32 and $39 million a year. They have RJ Barrett making $27.7. They have Jakob Poeltl making $19.5. And then they gave him 2 guaranteed years beyond that and a third year non-guaranteed that would have him making about $30.2 million in the 2029-2030 season. I mean, they are heavily invested in those 5 players, to say nothing of, Ochai Agbaji, Murray Boyles, Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter. Those aren't big salaries yet, but those are guys that, first round draft investments. They need playing time, and then as they establish themselves, eventually they're going to be working toward larger deals. So I just don't know exactly what this team is doing with their money. They are, right at the first apron with their team as things stand now. And I'm not sure, is this team guaranteed to make the playoffs? Are they that talented? Or could this get ugly? Could this be more like, hey, there's some injuries. Hey, we're starting from behind the 8 ball, and all of a sudden we're scratching and clawing to get 38, 39, 40 wins into the play-in round. That would be a very, very bad result. But yeah, they're already down to minimum contracts. They just don't have any cap space or any flexibility to use. So unless they really come out of the gates firing, I'm just concerned that this Toronto team isn't going to be particularly good enough to warrant all that expense. And then I don't know what the trades are to get off these guys. Scotty Barnes has famously been untouchable in some star trades in the past. But if you told me that the best way for them to sort of reset the deck after a disappointing 25-26 season was to move Scotty Barnes for a huge package and basically ride out the remaining years of the Brandon Ingram deal, try to get as young as possible, try to get as many picks as possible and kind of reset things along those terms. That I could see that happening, and that could get ugly. I mean, Toronto won the title in 2019. Yeah, I think that, in a vacuum, they liked all these guys that they brought together. I just don't think Quickly, Barrett, Barnes, Ingram, Pirtle guarantees that much in the East, even with the East wide open. I think that is really what we're going to find out. If this Raptors nucleus can't break through in the East this year, then what's going to happen when Halliburton, Tatum are back on the floor and, teams like the Magic and the Pistons are a year better? The Knicks and the Cavs are still in the mix. Maybe Giannis is still in Milwaukee. I just think that the future could get really bleak really fast for Toronto. So they need to win. I mean, that's the one way to make me look foolish, to make all of us, get off their back, would be just start winning games. Win 15 of your first 20 games, win 20 of your first 30 games, and show that this nucleus is worth spending the big bucks on. But I'm gonna break things down here. About an hour on the Eastern Conference. In general, I am excited. I do think that the idea that the Eastern Conference could be really brand new, even if it was just for 1 year, where the Cavs and the Knicks, yeah, we've seen them in the playoffs in recent years. We saw the Pistons get frisky last year, but what if we saw Orlando and Atlanta in the Eastern Conference Finals? What if we saw, I think we should be prepared for a lot of different variations in the Eastern Conference. And then, how does the regular season play out? If we see some teams high in the standings that kind of take us by surprise, do they make some big splashy moves to keep fortifying those efforts? I mean, I think the East is going to be a lot of fun this year. And, shout out to Tyrese Halliburton and Jason Tatum and Damian Lillard. He might not be in the East, moving forward, but, it's sad that these guys aren't going to be on the floor. But for us, basketball lifers and fans, we're going to see some other teams and some other guys have a real chance to break out. So that's a silver lining there at the end here. I'm going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed this episode and also the Western Conference coverage I'll have coming out. And, let's give it up for hoops. Big time to be a basketball fan. Jaka Kunis. They have Jaka Kunis. Jaka Kunis. They have Jaka Kunis.